poor girl shows up at interview with her mother's resume and says, "My mom's in the hospital. I came in her place." What the billionaire discovers is unbelievable. Thursday morning in Boston began just like any other for Caleb Whitmore. Wake up at 6, run in the park, have coffee, and drive to the building where his company occupied the top 3 floors. Caleb adjusted his tie as the elevator ascended. At 42, he had built Whitmore Solutions from scratch, a business consulting firm that started in a spare bedroom and now employed over 200 people. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Martha smiled, handing him a folder. "The candidates for the administrative assistant position are already waiting." Caleb nodded. "I'll start in 10 minutes. In his office, he opened the folder with 5 resumes. He needed someone efficient to replace Janet, who was retiring after 20 years of service. The first 3 interviews were mediocre. Questions about experience, professional goals, availability. None of the candidates impressed him. "Martha, could you call the next one, please?" The intercom remained silent. Strange. Martha always answered immediately. The door opened slowly. Caleb expected to see a young man in a suit, but who entered was a little girl, no more than 5 years old, brown hair in 2 messy braids, a simple blue dress, white socks, and slightly worn shoes. Caleb blinked, confused. He looked toward the door, expecting Martha to appear and explain the mistake. But the door closed, and the girl walked decisively to his desk. "Are you the boss?" she asked, her voice clear and articulate. "Yes, I am. But I think you're in the wrong place. I'm conducting job interviews." The girl nodded seriously. "I know, my mum's in the hospital. I came in her place." She held out a folded and crumpled paper, a resume. Caleb took it automatically. "Was your mother supposed to come for an interview today?" "Yes." The girl climbed onto the chair, swinging her legs, which didn't reach the floor. "She taught me you can't miss interviews. It's very, important." "And who brought you here?" "Mrs. Pearl is our neighbor. She dropped me at the door because she had to go to work. I told the lady at the reception I came for the interview, and she told me to come up." The girl tilted her head. "Aren't you going to read my mum's paper?" Caleb unfolded the resume. At the top was the name, Grace Holloway. The air seemed to vanish from the office. Grace Holloway. The name hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. A name he hadn't heard in over 6 years, but one that still appeared in his dreams. His mind instantly traveled back to the summer 16 years ago. He was 26, fresh out of business school, living in the Whitmore family mansion. Grace was one of the housemaids, 2 years younger, with wavy brown hair, hypnotizing green eyes, and a smile that lit up any room. Was it love at first sight? Not exactly. It was a connection that grew gradually during discreet meetings in the garden, late-night talks in the empty kitchen, stolen moments far from the watchful eyes of Eleanor Whitmore, Caleb's mother. 6 months of absolute happiness, plans for the future, talks of marriage, children, a house where it would be just the 2 of them. And then, one Monday morning, Grace simply didn't show up. No warning, no letter, no explanation. Her small room at the back of the mansion was empty, her few belongings gone. She had vanished like smoke into thin air. Caleb felt abandoned, betrayed. He tried to understand what had happened, why she would leave without a word after so many promises. But pride stopped him from looking for her. If she had chosen to leave his life this way, he would respect her decision. Eventually, he swallowed the pain and moved on. Or at least he tried to. "Sir, are you okay?" The little girl's voice brought him back to the present. Caleb blinked, focusing again on the green eyes, watching him with concern, eyes identical to Grace's. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice huskier than he intended. "Ellie," the girl replied. "Elizabeth Holloway, but everyone calls me Ellie." Elizabeth, Grace's grandmother's name. Caleb felt a sudden dizziness. If Grace had disappeared 6 years ago and this girl was about 5, "How old are you, Ellie?" 5.5, she answered, proudly showing her fingers. "I'll be 6 in December." See, Caleb swallowed hard. The dates matched perfectly. "And your mother? What happened to her?" Ellie fiddled with the edge of the desk. "She's been sick for a long time, coughing and tired. Last night she couldn't breathe right, and Mrs. Pearl called the ambulance. Her voice trembled. But my mum really needs this job. Caleb looked at the resume again. Several temporary jobs over the last 5 years, no period of stability. An address in a part of town known for cheap rent and poor conditions. The story began to form in his mind. Grace, alone, raising a daughter, struggling to survive, and now sick enough to be hospitalized. And this girl with green eyes and surprising determination, could she be his daughter? Which hospital is your mother in, Ellie? Memorial Hospital, she answered promptly. Room 307. Mrs. Pearl showed me the number. I memorized it. Caleb stood up, a decision made in an instant. Here's what we're going to do, Ellie. I'm going to cancel my other interviews, and we're both going to visit your mother. The girl's face lit up. Really? You'll take me? What about the job? Caleb smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. The job is practically guaranteed. I just need to talk to her about a few things first. He picked up the phone and called Martha. Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day. A family emergency has come up. In the elevator, Caleb watched the girl beside him. She held his hand with confidence. There were traces of grace in her face, no doubt. But there was also something familiar in her features, in the shape of her nose, the line of her jaw. Ellie, did you ever meet your father? The girl shook her head. Mommy says he was very important and had to leave before I was born. She always says she'll tell me everything one day when I'm big enough to understand. She made air quotes with her fingers. During the car ride, Ellie talked non-stop about her school, her favorite cartoons, how her mother read to her every night even when she was tired, how they had to move apartments frequently. Every word was a piece of the puzzle of Grace's last 6 years, and each piece broke Caleb's heart a little more. At the hospital, Ellie held his hand again, guiding him confidently through the corridors to the elevator. Have you been here before? Caleb asked. Yes, she replied. Mommy worked here for a while, in cleaning, but it was too tiring, and she kept coughing because of the products. On the 3rd floor, they went to room 307. The door was ajar. Ellie hesitated. What if she's sleeping? The nurse said she needs to rest. Caleb knelt. We can peek first. If she's sleeping, we'll come back later. Ellie nodded, satisfied with the solution. Caleb gently pushed the door open. The room was simple, with 2 beds separated by a curtain. The bed closest to the door was empty. In the 2nd bed, a female figure was sleeping. Oxygen tubes were connected to her nose. A heart monitor beeped softly. That's her, Ellie whispered. Caleb took a step forward, his heart racing. He went around the curtain and finally saw the sleeping woman's face. 6 years had passed, but he would recognize that face anywhere. The brown hair, now shorter and with a few premature grey strands. The thinner face, with lines of worry that didn't exist before. But it was her, Grace. A doctor entered the room, interrupting the moment. He looked at Caleb and Ellie with curiosity. Can I help you? Yes, Caleb answered, his voice firm. I'm Caleb Whitmore. This is my daughter, Ellie, and that is Grace Holloway. I'd like to talk about her condition. The doctor raised his eyebrows. Are you related to the patient? Caleb looked at the sleeping Grace, then at Ellie, who was watching him with hope. Yes, he replied, with a certainty he hadn't felt in years. We're family. The doctor consulted his clipboard and frowned. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Holloway's situation is delicate. Acute pneumonia, complicated by severe anemia and exhaustion. We need to keep her hospitalized for at least a week. He paused. However, she doesn't have health insurance. According to protocol, we would have to transfer her to a public hospital tomorrow. Caleb felt a wave of indignation. That won't be necessary. I'll cover all the expenses. I want her to receive the best possible treatment in this hospital. In that case, the doctor seemed relieved. I'll request that she be moved to a private room and assign our best team. Thank you, Doctor. Caleb extended his hand. My assistant will handle the financial arrangements today. After the doctor left, Ellie gently tugged on Caleb's jacket sleeve. Can we stay until she wakes up? Caleb nodded, pulling over 2 chairs. Of course we can. They sat side by side, watching Grace. Caleb couldn't take his eyes off her face. searching for the young woman he had known years ago in the pale, worn-out woman in the hospital bed. So many questions swirled in his mind. Why did she leave? Why did she never tell him about the pregnancy? How had she survived all these years? He looked at Ellie. She was swinging her legs, too quiet for a 5-year-old. Her small face showed a maturity that no child should have. "Are you hungry, Ellie?" She shrugged, but her stomach answered with an audible growl. "How about we go to the cafeteria while your mum rests? We can come back later." Ellie hesitated, looking at Grace. "What if she wakes up and doesn't see me? We can leave a note with the nurse, and I promise we'll be right back." In the cafeteria, Caleb watched Ellie devour a sandwich, fries, and a glass of juice. She ate like someone who hadn't seen a full meal in days. "Does your mum cook for you?" Ellie nodded. "Yes, but sometimes there isn't much food at home, so we share. Mommy always says I'll grow up strong, so I need to eat more than her." Every word from the girl was a stab to Caleb's heart. The image of Grace going hungry to feed her daughter was unbearable. "Do you like ice cream, Ellie?" Her eyes lit up. "I love it, but I only have it on my birthday." "It's our special ritual. We can make an exception today," he said, ordering 2 bowls of chocolate ice cream. While they ate, Caleb asked about school. "I don't go to school yet," she replied, licking the spoon. "Mommy teaches me at home. I know how to read, write, and do math." "And she's right," Caleb agreed. "Sa's not just any 5-year-old would go to a job interview alone." Ellie smiled, proud. Then her face turned serious. "Mr. Whitmore, are you really going to give my mom the job? She needs it badly. In our last apartment, the landlord yelled at her, and we had to leave. Now we live in a smaller place." The simplicity with which she spoke of hardships no child should know tightened Caleb's chest. "Ellie, your mother will get the job. Yes, and much more." On the way back to the room, Caleb made a quick call to Martha, instructing her to cancel his appointments for the next few days and to contact the hospital's finance department. When they arrived at the room, they found a nurse checking Grace's vital signs. She smiled when she saw them. She woke up for a few minutes and asked for her daughter. "I told her you were in the cafeteria. Now she's sleeping naturally, without sedation. She should wake up in the next few hours." "Thank you," Caleb replied. He noticed that Grace had been moved to a private room. The environment was more comfortable, with a reclining chair next to the bed. Ellie ran to her mother's side. "She looks better. She doesn't have that grey color anymore." Caleb smiled at the girl's precise observation. Indeed, Grace seemed to have regained some color. "Why don't you sit here in the armchair?" he suggested. "You can take a nap while we wait." To his surprise, Ellie accepted without protest. The long, emotional day seemed to have finally taken its toll. She curled up in the armchair, and within minutes, her eyes began to close. "Are you leaving?" she asked sleepily. "No," Caleb assured her, covering her with his jacket. "I'm going to stay here with you both." Satisfied, Ellie quickly fell asleep. Alone with his thoughts, Caleb pulled a chair and sat between the bed and the armchair, where he could see both mother and daughter at the same time. The resemblance between them was evident, but now he could also see his own traits in Ellie. The shape of her chin, the line of her eyebrow, the smile. His daughter. The idea still seemed unreal, but with each minute, it became more concrete. He had a daughter he hadn't known for 5 years, a daughter who grew up in poverty while he built an empire. The feeling of guilt was replaced by determination. It didn't matter what had happened in the past, why Grace left, or why she never told him about the pregnancy. What mattered was the present. And in the present, 2 people who shared his blood needed him. Caleb watched Grace's sleeping face. Despite the marks of time and suffering, it was still the face of the woman he had loved. The only woman he had ever truly loved, he realized now. After her disappearance, there had been relationships, of course, but nothing significant, nothing lasting. When Grace finally opened her eyes, he would be there, ready to hear her explanations, to understand her reasons, ready to offer help, support, and perhaps, with time, forgiveness. But above all, ready to get to know his daughter, to be the father Ellie deserved, to create the family that fate had separated, and now inexplicably reunited. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting golden rays through the hospital window. A new day was ending, and for Caleb Whitmore a new life was just beginning. The hospital room was silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. The morning sun streamed softly through the slats of the blinds, creating golden bands that cut through the air. Caleb had been sitting in the same chair for hours, his gaze alternating between the sleeping Grace and Ellie, who was still asleep, curled up in the armchair, covered with his jacket. The night had been long. A nurse had come in to check Grace's vital signs every 2 hours, always careful not to wake the little girl. Caleb refused to leave, despite the gentle suggestions of the medical staff. Something inside him feared that if he left that room, he would return to find only empty walls, as if Grace and Ellie might disappear from his life again. He watched Grace's face, now more flushed than the day before. The antibiotics were working, according to the doctor who had passed by on the first morning round. His gaze swept over every detail of that face he once knew so well. The small wrinkles at the corner of her eyes that hadn't been there before, the mouth that no longer held the easy smile of years past. The marks that life, a life of hardship from what he could deduce, had imprinted on her. A subtle movement of Grace's fingers caught his attention. Her eyes were moving under her closed eyelids. Was she dreaming, or finally waking up? Caleb leaned forward, his heart racing. He saw her eyelids flutter, then slowly open, disoriented, adjusting to the light. Her gaze wandered over the ceiling, then the walls of the room, as if trying to remember where she was. Then her eyes met Caleb's. The recognition was instant. Caleb saw shock spread across her face, her green eyes widening, her breathing visibly quickening, causing the heart monitor to beep faster. Grace tried to sit up, but weakness made her fall back against the pillows. "Easy," Caleb whispered, not wanting to wake Ellie. "It's okay, you're in the hospital." Grace looked around again, now with more focus, until her eyes found the small, sleeping figure in the armchair. Her expression softened, relieved to see her daughter, but quickly returned to confusion as she looked back at Caleb. "How did you—" Her voice came out raspy, almost inaudible, the result of days of coughing and a dry throat. Caleb reached for a cup of water with a straw on the bedside table and offered it to her. Grace took a few cautious sips before pushing the cup away. "Ellie came to me with your resume," he replied, keeping his voice low. "She said you needed the job." "Your daughter is incredible." Grace closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the information. When she opened them again, they were moist. "She wasn't supposed to. The neighbor promised to watch her while I was here." "Mrs. Pearl, from what Ellie said, she had to go to work. Your daughter is determined, Grace. She decided that if you couldn't go to the interview, she would go in your place." Caleb couldn't suppress a slight smile. "She walked into my office like a little executive." A tear ran down Grace's face, followed by another. She turned her face to the opposite side and trying to hide them, but her body trembled with a silent sob. Caleb waited, giving her space. He knew it wasn't just Ellie's story that made her cry, but the full weight of the situation, seeing him again after so many years, the condition they were in, the 1,000 unasked questions that hung in the air between them. "How long?" Grace finally spoke, still not looking at him. "How long have I been here?" "You were admitted the night before last." "Ellie came to my company yesterday morning." Caleb hesitated, then added, "She said you'd been coughing for weeks." Grace nodded weakly. "I couldn't stop working. I couldn't risk losing another job." Her words, so simple and direct, revealed a world of hardship Caleb could barely imagine. A single, sick mother, forcing herself to work to support her daughter. "The doctor said you have pneumonia, aggravated by anemia and exhaustion," Caleb said. "You need to stay hospitalized for at least a week." Panic crossed Grace's face. "I can't. I have no way to pay. And Ellie, I've already taken care of it," Caleb interrupted gently. "The hospital expenses, the private room, everything. And as for Ellie, she can stay with me while you recover." Grace finally looked back at him, her green eyes scanning his face, as if searching for something, perhaps anger, resentment, or some hidden motive. What she found must have been different, because her shoulders relaxed slightly. Why? The question was almost a whisper. Why would you do this? After everything, Caleb looked at Ellie, still asleep, and then back at Grace. You know why, he replied softly. Grace followed his gaze to her daughter, then closed her eyes, more tears streaming silently. The non-verbal confirmation of what they both had known since the moment they saw each other again. I was going to tell you, she murmured. And when I found out, I had already left. And then, the more time passed, the harder it became to come back. Caleb didn't ask why she had left. There would be time for that conversation. For now, what mattered was the present. Grace, he called, and waited until she opened her eyes to continue. I'm not here to demand explanations or make accusations. I'm here because, by some miracle, our daughter found me, and because you both need help. He reached out and, after a moment of hesitation, took her hand in his. It was cold, thinner than he remembered, her fingers calloused from hard work. Let me help you. For both of you. Grace's expression was a mixture of gratitude, fear, and something deeper, perhaps the memory of what they once felt for each other. She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't answer immediately either. Caleb, She stopped, searching for the words. I don't want your pity. I don't want you to feel obligated. It's not pity, he replied firmly. It's responsibility. It's the right thing to do. He almost said it's love, but held back. It was too soon for that, no matter how much his heart recognized the feeling that had never completely disappeared. At that moment, a small movement came from the armchair. Ellie was stretching, slowly opening her eyes. When she saw her mother awake, her face lit up with a smile that could melt the coldest of hearts. Mommy, she exclaimed, jumping from the armchair and running to the bed. You're awake! Grace opened her arms, and Ellie threw herself into them carefully, as if she knew instinctively not to be too rough. Grace hugged her tightly, burying her face in her daughter's hair, and Caleb could see her shoulders trembling again with contained emotion. I missed you, Ellie murmured against her mother's shoulder. I missed you too, my love, but you were very brave. Grace pulled back a little to look at her daughter. Mr. Whitmore told me you went to the interview in my place. Ellie nodded proudly. I took your resume, just like you taught me. And look, she pointed to Caleb. He came to visit you. He's really nice, Mommy. He bought me chocolate ice cream yesterday. Grace looked at Caleb over her daughter's head, her gaze a mixture of gratitude and something more complex, perhaps the understanding that, from that moment on, their lives would never be the same. I'm going to get the nurse, Caleb said, standing up. They need to know you're awake. As he headed for the door, he heard Ellie talking excitedly to her mother, telling her about the big building where Caleb worked, the car with the driver, the hospital cafeteria. The pure joy in the little girl's voice was like music. Caleb stopped at the door and looked back one last time. Grace was still watching him over her daughter's head. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it was as if the last 6 years hadn't existed. There was recognition, mutual understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the seed of a new beginning. He smiled at her, a gentle, pressure-free smile. Grace didn't smile back, but something in her gaze softened. It was enough, for now. They had a long way to go. Caleb watched Ellie sitting in the armchair next to Grace's bed. The girl was holding her mother's hand, who had fallen asleep after their brief conversation. The doctor had just left, after explaining that Grace would need to stay hospitalized for at least a week for the full treatment. Ellie, Caleb called softly. Can we talk outside for a bit? The girl nodded, gently letting go of her mother's hand. Together, they walked to a small indoor garden in the hospital, where a few recovering patients were sunbathing in chairs arranged among the well-tended flower beds. Your mum will need to stay in the hospital for a few days, Caleb explained, choosing his words carefully. The doctors need to treat her properly so she can get well soon. Ellie nodded, understanding. I know, the doctor said she has something. Pneumonia, Caleb corrected gently. It's an infection in her lungs. That's why she was having trouble breathing. And now? The question was simple but heavy with concern. Now she'll stay here, getting medicine and resting. Caleb hesitated for a moment, then continued, "And you, if you want, can stay with me during this time. I have a guest room where you'd be comfortable." Ellie studied him with her perceptive green eyes. "Mrs. Pearl also offered moi bakchar, but she works all day." "I've rearranged my schedule to work from home while your mom is in the hospital," Caleb replied. "That way we can come visit her every day." The girl considered the proposal for a few moments, showing a surprising maturity for her 5 years. "Okay," she finally agreed. "But I need to get some things from our apartment." "Of course," Caleb nodded. "We can go right now." Grace and Ellie's apartment was in an old building in the southern part of the city. The elevator was broken, and they climbed 3 floors up a narrow staircase. Ellie opened the door with a small key she took from her dress pocket. The space was tiny, a living room that also served as a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. Everything was impeccably clean and organized, but the signs of financial hardship were evident. Worn-out furniture, walls with peeling paint, a single window with makeshift curtains. "This is where we live," Ellie said, without shame or embarrassment. "So it's not as big as your house, but Mommy makes everything pretty." Caleb felt a lump in his throat. "It's very cozy," he managed to say. Ellie picked up a small backpack and began to pack some clothes, a worn-out storybook, and a teddy bear with one eye missing. Caleb noticed her clothes would easily fit in a single drawer. A few t-shirts, 2 dresses, a mended pair of pajamas. "Ready?" she announced, zipping up the backpack. "Just this." The girl nodded. "This is all I need. And Mr. Buttons." She showed him the teddy bear. "Hey, he keeps me company when Mommy works at night." Caleb helped her with the backpack, and soon they were on their way to his apartment. During the car ride, Ellie looked out the window, fascinated, pointing at the tall buildings and the colorful shop windows. "Do you live near here?" she asked. "In Beacon Hill," Caleb replied. Seeing her confused expression, he explained, "It's a neighborhood not too far from downtown. You'll like it there." When they arrived at the elegant red brick building, Ellie was momentarily speechless. The doorman greeted them with a respectful smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitmore." "Good afternoon, George. This is Ellie. She'll be staying with me for a few days." "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Ellie," the doorman said, bowing slightly. In the elevator, Ellie finally found her voice. "Why did he call me Miss?" "It's a polite way to address a young lady," Caleb explained, surprised by the question. "No one's ever called me that before," she commented thoughtfully. The elevator opened directly into Caleb's apartment, a duplex that occupied the top 2 floors of the building. The living room was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. "Your house is a palace," Ellie whispered, taking hesitant steps inside. Caleb smiled. "It's not a palace, but it's comfortable. Come on, I'll show you your room." He led her to a guest room on the upper floor, spacious, with a queen-sized bed, a small sofa by the window, and a desk. The colors were neutral, predominantly shades of light blue and gray. "I know it's not very cheerful for a child," Caleb noted. "Tomorrow we can buy some things to make it more colorful." Ellie shook her head. "It's perfect like this. I've never had a room all to myself." The simplicity of the statement caught Caleb by surprise. "You share a room with your mother?" "Yes. Our apartment only has 1 bedroom." She walked to the window, marveling at the view. "Can we see stars from here?" "A few. On the clearest nights. The city has a lot of light, so it's hard. Mommy showed me the constellations once when we went to the park at night." She turned to him. "Do you know the constellations?" "I know a few," he replied, making a mental note to study the subject. "You must be hungry. How about we order some food?" The following days established a routine. In the morning, Caleb would prepare a simple breakfast. He discovered Ellie loved pancakes with honey. Then, they would visit Grace at the hospital. In the afternoon, while Caleb worked from home, Ellie would read the books they had bought or draw at the living room table. At the end of the day, they would visit Grace again before returning home. It was on the 3rd day that Caleb realized how completely his life had changed. He was in his office when he heard a small noise at the door. Ellie was standing there, holding a drawing. "Can I show you something?" she asked shyly. "Of course." Caleb pushed his laptop aside, giving the girl his full attention. Ellie approached and placed the drawing on the desk. It was a simple but surprisingly detailed illustration of 3 people, a woman, a man, and a little girl. "This is us," she explained. "You, me, and Mommy when she gets out of the hospital." Caleb felt a lump in his throat. "It's a beautiful drawing, Ellie. Do you think she'll like it?" "I'm sure she will," he replied sincerely. "We can take it to her tomorrow." Ellie smiled, satisfied. "Can I stay here while you work? I promise to be quiet." "You can." Caleb pulled a chair closer to his desk. "You can draw more if you want." While he worked, Caleb discreetly watched the girl concentrated on her drawing, her tongue stuck between her teeth in an expression of absolute focus. It was strange how in just 3 days, her presence had become natural, even necessary. The apartment, once a pristine but empty space, now had life. There were children's books in the living room, small shoes in the hallway, laughter echoing in the walls that had once only known silence. On the morning of the 4th day, Caleb woke to the sound of light footsteps in the hallway. He opened his bedroom door to find Ellie already dressed, trying to reach the frozen pancakes on the top shelf of the refrigerator. "Good morning, early bird," he said, helping her get the box. "Why didn't you call me?" "I wanted to make a surprise," she replied. "I already know how to turn on the microwave." Caleb smiled, but made a mental note to explain kitchen safety. Together, they prepared breakfast, with Ellie insisting on setting the table, like in the restaurants. She placed folded napkins, aligned silverware, and even found a small vase where she put some artificial flowers from the living room. Perfect," Caleb approved, sitting at the table he usually only used to drop mail. "You'd be a great hostess." "What's a hostess?" Ellie asked, biting into a pancake. "It's someone who welcomes people into their home and makes them feel welcome." She considered the explanation. "So are you a host for me?" "I guess I am," Caleb replied. "Do you feel welcome?" Ellie nodded, her mouth full of pancake. When she swallowed, she said, "This is the best house I've ever visited. But I miss Mommy." "I know." Caleb reached out, touching her hand briefly. "We'll visit her again today and bring her your drawing." The sparkle in the girl's eyes was worth all the gold in the world. On the 5th day, they bought school supplies. During a conversation at the hospital, Grace had mentioned that she taught Ellie at home, but they didn't always have adequate resources. "Do you like to study?" Caleb asked as they browsed a large bookstore. "I love it," she replied, her eyes shining before the colorful shelves. "Hi, Mommy says studying is the only thing no one can take away from you." Caleb felt a pang, thinking about what Grace had faced to pass on these values to her daughter, even in such adverse conditions. "She's right," he agreed. "How about we pick out some books for you both?" Ellie selected carefully: storybooks, an atlas, science books with lots of illustrations. With each choice, she explained why she thought it was important or interesting. Her maturity and discernment surprised Caleb every day. That night, they read one of the new books together. It was about a trip to space, with stunning illustrations of planets and stars. Ellie asked insightful questions, absorbing every piece of information with enthusiasm. "When I grow up, I want to be an astronaut," she declared, looking at an image of the Earth from space. "Or a doctor or a teacher. I haven't decided yet." "You have time," Caleb smiled, "and you can be whatever you want." "Mommy always says that." She yawned, the day's excitement finally catching up with her. "She's going to like these books." "I'm sure she will," Caleb replied, helping her get settled in bed. "We'll take some for her to see tomorrow." When it was time to sleep, Ellie asked, "Can you leave the door open a little? I don't like it when it's too dark." "Of course," Caleb replied, leaving a crack in the door. "Mr. Whitmore?" Ellie called as he was leaving. "Thank you for taking care of me while Mommy gets better." Caleb felt a wave of affection for the small figure in the big bed. "Thank you, Ellie. It's been special." Later, alone in his room, Caleb realized how much his life had changed in just 1 week. It wasn't just the physical changes, the toys, the children's books, the adjusted routines. It was something deeper, an inner transformation. Before, his life revolved around work, goals and numbers, important meetings, tight deadlines, tense negotiations. Things that seemed essential just 7 days ago now felt so distant. He had cancelled or rescheduled appointments he once would have considered non-negotiable, all to be present for a child he barely knew but who already occupied a huge space in his heart. Now, suddenly, he cared about things like pancakes for breakfast, bedtime stories, and stars that could barely be seen through the city lights. He cared about learning constellations to answer Ellie's curious questions, about finding the right balance between discipline and freedom for a child who had already lived with too many responsibilities for her age. In the dining room, Caleb had hung the drawing Ellie had made of the three of them. Every time he passed by, he would stop for a moment to look at it. The simple figures, the big smiles, the joined hands, a family. The word came to his mind uninvited, but he didn't push it away. Maybe that's what they were becoming, in an unlikely and unexpected way. The next morning, Caleb and Ellie were getting ready for another visit to the hospital. Today would be the day for the important conversation with the doctors, Grace's full diagnosis, the treatment prospects, the recovery time. "Ellie," Caleb called as the girl carefully arranged some drawings to show her mother. "You know that, no matter what happens, I'll continue to help you and your mum, right?" She looked at him, her green eyes serious and confident. "I know," she replied simply. "Mommy seems happier when you're there." The girl's insightful observation caught him off guard. Not knowing what to say, he just smiled. "I'm ready," Ellie announced, holding her small backpack with the drawings and books. "Let's go see Mommy." Together, they set out for the day that would bring important news, the diagnosis that would determine the next steps in this unexpected journey they had begun. The soft morning light illuminated the hospital corridor as Caleb and Ellie walked hand in hand. She held tightly to the backpack with the drawings and books she had set aside to show her mother. They stopped in front of room 307, and Caleb noticed Dr. Richards talking to a nurse near the station. "Ellie, can you go in and stay with your mum? I need to talk to the doctor for a moment." The girl nodded and entered the room, leaving the door ajar. Caleb approached the doctor, who greeted him with a nod. "Mr. Whitmore, I was just looking for you. We have the results of Mrs. Holloway's tests. Would you like to discuss them in my office?" "It would be better right here, Doctor. I don't want to get too far from the room." Dr. Richards nodded, understanding. He led Caleb to a small, empty meeting room and closed the door. They sat facing each other, and the doctor opened a folder with several papers. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Holloway's condition is more complex than we initially thought." The doctor adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents. "She has acute pneumonia, as we had already diagnosed, but the blood tests revealed severe anemia that is complicating her recovery." "Severe anemia," Caleb repeated, feeling a pang of concern. "What does that mean exactly?" "Her hemoglobin levels are dangerously low, less than half the ideal for a woman her age. This compromises the transport of oxygen in the blood, making any infection much more serious." The doctor paused, his gaze professional but compassionate. "Mr. Whitmore, this anemia didn't appear overnight. Based on the patterns we're seeing, it has likely been developing for years." "Years?" Caleb felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "How is that possible without her noticing?" "Unfortunately, it's quite common, especially in people who don't have regular access to medical care." Dr. Richards turned to the next page of results. "Her anemia has characteristics typical of prolonged nutritional deficiency, a lack of iron, B vitamins, folic acid. On top of that, we found indicators of chronic exhaustion and compromised immunity." Caleb tried to process the information, but his mind was filled with images. Grace working as a maid in his family's house years ago, the small apartment he had visited with Ellie, the girl mentioning that sometimes there wasn't much food at home. "In layman's terms, Doctor," Caleb asked, his voice huskier than usual, "what's happening to her?" The doctor sighed, abandoning the clinical language for a moment. "Her body is exhausted, Mr. Whitmore. Years of inadequate nutrition, likely combined with overwork and stress, without regular medical supervision. It's like a car that's been driven continuously without maintenance and with low-quality fuel. Eventually, it breaks down. And the treatment, and the... What are the prospects?" With the proper treatment, she can make a full recovery. Dr. Richards closed the folder, but it won't be quick or simple. We're treating the pneumonia with broad-spectrum antibiotics, and we've already started transfusions for the anemia. But the most important thing will be what happens after she's discharged. What do you mean? Mrs. Holloway will need a complete change in her lifestyle. Absolute rest for at least a month. A balanced diet rich in specific nutrients, vitamin supplementation, regular medical follow-ups. The doctor looked directly into Caleb's eyes. And most importantly, no heavy physical labor or multiple jobs, at least for the next 3 to 6 months. The reality of the situation hit Caleb with full force. Grace was a single mother, living in a tiny apartment, likely struggling to pay the bills. How could she go months without working? I understand, he said finally. And when can she be discharged? If she continues to respond well to the antibiotics, in about 5 days. But I insist, she will not be in a condition to resume her previous routine. Don't worry about that, doctor. I'll make all the necessary arrangements. Caleb stood up, extending his hand. Thank you for your frankness. When the doctor left, Caleb remained in the room for a few minutes, trying to organize his thoughts. A wave of guilt washed over him. Years. Grace had been in this situation for years, while he lived comfortably, building his company, accumulating wealth. If he had looked for her when she disappeared, if he had insisted, investigated more, he took a deep breath, pushing those thoughts away. The past couldn't be changed. What mattered now was the present, and what he could do from now on. When he entered the room, he found Grace sitting up in bed, with Ellie beside her proudly showing off the drawings she had made. Seeing Caleb, the girl smiled. Look, Mr. Whitmore. Mommy loved the drawing of the 3 of us. Grace looked at him, a silent thank you in her eyes. She looked a little better, less pale, more alert, but Caleb could now clearly see the signs the doctor had mentioned. The excessive thinness, the weariness in her eyes, small signs of a prolonged struggle against circumstances he could barely imagine. It's a wonderful drawing, Caleb commented, approaching the bed. Grace, I just spoke with Dr. Richards about your test results. Ellie, dear, Grace addressed her daughter, why don't you go to the cafeteria and get some juice? Here's some money. Can I go by myself? Ellie asked, excited by the responsibility. Oh, the cafeteria is just down the hall, Grace replied. Go and come straight back, no detours. When the girl left, Grace turned to Caleb, her expression now serious. How bad is it? Caleb sat in the chair next to the bed and explained everything the doctor had said. He didn't soften the truth, but he was gentle in laying out the gravity of the situation. As he spoke, he watched Grace absorb the information, not with surprise or shock, but with a resignation that revealed that, somehow, she already knew. Months without working, she murmured when he finished. That's not possible, Caleb. I have bills to pay, Ellie to care for. Don't worry about that now, he replied, instinctively touching her hand. I'm here to help. You just need to focus on getting well. Grace gently withdrew her hand, her eyes lowered. I can't accept this. You've already done too much paying for this hospital, taking care of Ellie. Grace, look at me. Caleb waited until she raised her eyes. I'm not doing this out of charity. I'm doing it because... He hesitated, searching for the right words. Because you two are important to me, more than I can explain. A silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words, unasked questions. It was broken by the cheerful return of Ellie, holding a cup of orange juice and a packet of cookies she had bought with the change. Look, Mommy, I brought cookies for us to share. The rest of the visit passed with Ellie excitedly recounting her stay at Caleb's apartment, the books they had bought, the pancakes she had learned to make in the microwave. Grace smiled and asked questions, but Caleb could see the worry behind her smile. At the end of the afternoon, when Grace began to show signs of fatigue, Caleb suggested they head home. Come on, Ellie, your mum needs to rest. We'll be back early tomorrow. The girl gave her mother a careful hug and collected her drawings, leaving only the portrait of the 3 of them hanging on the wall near the bed. So you don't feel lonely, she explained. On the way back, Caleb decided to stop at a small restaurant. What do you think about eating out tonight? I'm too tired to cook. Ellie agreed enthusiastically. The place was simple but cozy. Wooden tables, yellow lighting, the aroma of home-cooked food. They sat in a quiet corner, and Caleb helped Ellie choose from the menu. While they ate, Caleb noticed the girl was unusually quiet, playing distractedly with her food. "Is everything okay, Ellie? You don't like the food?" "It's good," she replied. After a pause, she asked, "Is Mommy really going to get better?" The question caught Caleb by surprise. Of course, she would sense the seriousness of the situation, no matter how much they tried to protect her. "Yes, she will," he answered with conviction, "but it's going to take a while. She'll need to rest a lot after she gets out of the hospital." Ellie nodded thoughtfully. "We've been through hard times before," she said, her voice small but firm. "Sometimes we didn't have lights, but Mommy said we'd make it." Caleb felt a lump in his throat. "And you did, didn't you?" "Yes." Ellie twirled some pasta on her fork. "Mommy always finds a way. She's my hero, you know?" "She really is amazing," Caleb agreed, fighting the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "The kids on my street have dads, but I never did." Ellie spoke without sadness, just stating a fact. "But it doesn't matter, because I have the best mom in the world. She does everything by herself." Every word was like a knife in Caleb's heart. He imagined Grace, young and alone, raising a daughter in conditions he had never experienced, working to exhaustion, depriving herself of food so Ellie could eat, facing the cold when there was no money to pay for electricity. "When Mommy is really tired," Ellie continued, "I make dinner. I know how to heat up soup and make a sandwich." "You're a very special girl, Ellie," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "Your mother must be very proud of you. She says I'm the best gift she's ever received." Ellie smiled, a smile so much like Grace's that Caleb felt his heart ache. "I say she's my best gift too." In that moment, watching the small figure in front of him, so young and yet carrying a maturity forged by adversity, Caleb understood something profound. Ellie was more than just his biological daughter. She was the living reflection of Grace's silent sacrifice, of the unconditional love that had sustained her all these years. The anger he had felt at himself earlier returned with full force. He hadn't been there when Grace needed him most. He hadn't seen his daughter's birth, hadn't held her hand in the difficult moments, hadn't helped turn on the lights when darkness filled the small apartment, but he was here now. And he would do everything in his power to ensure that Grace and Ellie would never face hardship again. "Mr. Whitmore," Ellie's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you crying?" Caleb hadn't realized the tear running down his face. He quickly wiped it away, forcing a smile. "Sometimes adults cry too," he answered simply. "And especially when they hear beautiful things." Ellie looked at him with her big green eyes, Grace's eyes, and extended her small hand across the table, touching his in a surprisingly adult gesture of comfort. "Don't be sad. Now Mommy will get better, and we won't have any more hardships, right?" "No," Caleb assured her, holding her little hand carefully. "You won't." It was a promise, to Ellie, to Grace, and to himself. After intense days at the hospital, watching Grace's slow recovery and absorbing the gravity of her condition, Caleb realized that both he and Ellie needed a break. The girl, despite her surprising maturity, was still a 5-year-old child carrying worries far too heavy for her small shoulders. On Saturday morning, after the usual visit to Grace, who was now visibly better thanks to the transfusions and antibiotics, Caleb made a spontaneous decision. "Ellie," he called as they left the hospital, "what do you think about doing something different today, maybe lunch at a special place?" The girl's eyes lit up, like a real restaurant. "With waiters and everything?" "Exactly," Caleb smiled, realizing that something so simple for him could be a grand adventure for her. "I know a place you'll love." Instead of asking James to pick them up in the car, Caleb decided they would walk. The day was perfect. Blue sky, mild temperature, a light breeze rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the streets of downtown Boston. Ellie held his hand confidently, observing everything around her with curious eyes. "That building looks like it's touching the sky," she commented, pointing to a mirrored glass skyscraper. "It's one of the tallest in the city," Caleb explained. Did you know there are special elevators that go up so fast your ears pop? Like when the plane goes up in stories. That's right. Have you ever seen a real airplane? Ellie shook her head. Only on TV and in books. Mommy said one day we'll travel by plane. To Florida, where that princess castle is. Disney World, Caleb said, making a mental note. It's an amazing place. They walked for about 20 minutes until they reached a charming Italian restaurant in the city's historic district. It wasn't extremely luxurious. Caleb had deliberately chosen a place that was sophisticated but welcoming, where Ellie wouldn't feel intimidated. Welcome to Bella Vita, the maitre d' greeted them with a warm smile. Table for two. Yes, please, preferably by the window. They were led to an excellent table, overlooking a small, tree-lined square. Ellie climbed onto the upholstered chair, her eyes scanning the room with fascination. The small, elegant crystal chandeliers, the impeccable white tablecloths, the fresh flower arrangements on each table. It's so beautiful, she whispered, as if afraid to break the spell by speaking too loudly. A waiter approached, handing them menus and placing a glass of water with lemon for each of them. He also offered Caleb the wine list, which he politely declined. "May I bring a children's menu for the little lady?" the waiter asked. "What do you think, Ellie?" Caleb inquired. "Or would you prefer to choose from the big menu?" "Can I see the big menu first?" she asked, surprising both Caleb and the waiter. "Of course you can," the waiter smiled, clearly charmed by the girl. Ellie opened the extensive menu, studying it with the same concentration she devoted to her books. Caleb watched her, amazed by her insatiable curiosity. "Famassa, there are so many foods I've never heard of," she commented, frowning at the Italian words. "What is ravioli? They're like little stuffed pasta pillows," Caleb explained. "They can be filled with cheese, meat, spinach, and carbonara. It's a creamy pasta sauce made with eggs, cheese, and bacon." Ellie considered the options for a few more moments before deciding, "I want to try the ravioli. It sounds fun to eat." After placing their orders, cheese ravioli for Ellie, lasagna for Caleb, and a caprese salad to share, the girl turned her attention back to her surroundings. She watched a family with two slightly older children at a nearby table. The children were wearing school uniforms. "They go to a real school," Ellie commented, a note of longing in her voice. "Yes," Caleb confirmed. "It looks like they just got out of class." "Mommy teaches me at home," Ellie said, tracing patterns on the condensation of her water glass. "She's a good teacher, but—" She hesitated, as if afraid of being disloyal. "But what?" Caleb encouraged gently. "My dream is to go to a real school," she confided, her voice low but intense. "I'd have a backpack, recess, friends." Her eyes sparkled as she imagined it. "To learn new things every day and play on the playground." Something in Caleb's chest tightened. It was such a simple, fundamental wish, something most children took for granted. But for Ellie, it was a distant dream. "Would you like to go to a school when your mother gets better?" he asked. Ellie nodded emphatically, then seemed worried. "But schools cost money, right? Mommy always says we need to save for important things." "There are many good schools that don't cost anything," Caleb explained, "and education is one of the most important things there is." The arrival of the salad momentarily interrupted the conversation. Ellie looked curiously at the white cheese discs, interspersed with red tomatoes and green basil leaves. "It looks like the flag of Italy," she observed, surprising Caleb with her knowledge. "Exactly. How do you know about the Italian flag?" "I have a book of world flags," she explained naturally. "Mommy found it at the library where she used to work. I've memorized almost all of them." As they enjoyed the salad, Ellie continued to talk about her love for books and knowledge. She told him how her mother always made time to take her to the public library, even after exhaustive work shifts, how they saved coins in a special jar to buy a new book on special occasions. When the main course arrived, Ellie was delighted with the small ravioli arranged on her plate, covered in a delicate butter and sage sauce. "They look like little pillows," she exclaimed, making Caleb laugh. Lunch proceeded with light conversation and laughter. Ellie savored each bite with genuine pleasure, tasting flavors she had never experienced before. Caleb watched her, his heart filling with a growing determination. This bright, curious and knowledge-thirsty child, deserved every opportunity. She deserved a full childhood, with school, friends, activities, trips, all the experiences that shape a person. And Grace deserved to see her daughter flourish without the constant weight of financial worry. When dessert arrived, tiramisu for Caleb and vanilla ice cream with chocolate syrup for Ellie, the girl was more relaxed and excited than he had seen her in days, the weight of her worries temporarily forgotten. She was just a 5-year-old girl enjoying a moment of pure joy. "This is the best day," she declared, with chocolate on the corner of her mouth. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Call me Caleb," he said, surprising himself. "And thank you for your company." After lunch, they walked through the square, stopping to watch a group of street musicians. Ellie was fascinated by the violinist, her little feet moving to the rhythm of the cheerful music. "Would you like to learn to play an instrument?" Caleb asked. "Piano," she replied promptly. "There's one at the church near our house. The lady who plays sometimes lets me press the keys after Mass." Another mental note. Piano, school, new backpack, friends, a normal childhood. As he watched Ellie dancing freely to the sound of the music, Caleb made a silent but firm decision. He would make it happen. All the dreams this little girl carried, going to school, having friends, learning piano, even visiting that castle in Florida, and he would do it not out of guilt or obligation, but because Ellie deserved it. The day had started as a simple break from worry, an attempt to ease the emotional burden of the last few days. But it had turned into something more, a glimpse of the future they could build together. A future where Ellie could just be a child, where she could run, play, learn, and dream without carrying the weight of adult worries on her small shoulders. A future where Grace could recover completely, without the constant fear of tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, a future where the three of them could find happiness together. As the sun began to set, casting golden rays over the city, Caleb picked Ellie up for the walk back. She rested her head on his shoulder, tired but content. "It was a very happy day," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yes," Caleb agreed, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. It was just the first of many. The second week of Grace's hospitalization brought visible changes in her condition. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her breathing was no longer labored, and the doctors were talking about discharging her in the coming days. The blood transfusions had raised her hemoglobin levels to acceptable ranges, and the pneumonia was receding in the face of powerful antibiotics. That afternoon, Caleb decided to visit Grace alone. Martha, his secretary, had offered to take Ellie to the movies, an outing the girl had never experienced, and which left her beaming with anticipation. Before leaving, Ellie hugged Caleb and whispered, "Tell Mommy I'm going to see a movie on the big screen today." Now, as he walked down the familiar hospital corridor, Caleb felt a strange mix of anxiety and expectation. Since the full diagnosis, his conversations with Grace had been mostly about her health and about Ellie. Their shared past remained an unexplored territory between them, a silent space they both avoided for different reasons. But today would be different. He had made a decision. He knocked gently on the room door before entering. Grace was sitting up in bed, a book open on her lap, one of the ones Ellie had chosen at the bookstore. When she saw him, she marked the page and smiled slightly. "Where is Hurricane Ellie?" she asked, noticing her absence. "The movies," Caleb replied, sitting in the chair next to the bed. Martha took her to see that new animated movie about dinosaurs. From her excitement, it seemed like she was going to another planet. Grace laughed, a sound Caleb had heard more of in recent days, and which always had a strange effect on his chest. "She's never been to the movies," Grace commented, a shadow briefly crossing her eyes. "I always wanted to take her, but now she's going," Caleb completed softly. "And there will be many other first times." A comfortable silence settled between them. Grace seemed more relaxed today, less on the defensive. Perhaps it was the improvement in her health, or perhaps the certainty that Ellie was being well cared for. "How are you feeling?" Caleb asked, genuinely interested. "Better, stronger." She adjusted herself against the pillows. "Dr. Richards said I might be discharged in 2 days if my tests keep improving." "That's great." "Yes, but," she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands, He also said I won't be able to work for at least a month, and that I'll need continuous follow-ups, medication, a special diet. Grace, Caleb interrupted gently. We've already talked about this. Don't worry about the financial part. I'm here to help. Why? The question was direct, her green eyes finally meeting his. Why are you doing all this, Caleb? It was the moment he had anticipated, the opening for the conversation they needed to have. For several reasons, he replied calmly. For Ellie, of course. She is. Well, we both know who she is to me. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. And for you, Grace. For what we had. For what we could have had. Grace looked away, her expression a complex mix of emotions. Ellie is incredible, Caleb said, slightly changing the course of the conversation. Her intelligence, her sensitivity, the way she looks at the world. When I think that I almost didn't know her. She has a lot of you in her, Grace replied softly, not just in looks, the determination, the insatiable curiosity, even that wrinkle that forms between her eyebrows when she's concentrating. A small smile touched her lips. Whenever I saw her do that, I remembered you. The revelation hit Caleb like a gentle but powerful wave. For all these years, Grace had seen him in her daughter. She had preserved this connection, even when all seemed lost. She has the best of you, he said with sincerity. Grace looked at him, her eyes softened. And the best of you too, even without knowing it. There was an exchange of glances, a delicate moment, fragile as crystal, where something old and dormant seemed to awaken. It wasn't love, not yet. It was more basic, more fundamental. Trust, the beginning of a bridge over the abyss that the years had created between them. Caleb took a deep breath. It was now or never. Grace, he began, his voice calm but firm, there's something I need to ask you. Something that has haunted me for 6 years. He paused, gathering courage. Why did you disappear? I looked for you. The lie escaped before he could contain it. He hadn't looked for her, not really. Wounded pride had stopped him. But somehow, in this moment, it seemed important for her to know that he had missed her, that her absence had left a void. Grace was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the window, where the afternoon sun created golden patterns through the blinds. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. Your mother found out about our relationship. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Caleb felt his body tense. Eleanor called me into her office at the mansion one day while you were in the city, Grace continued, each word seeming painful to pronounce. She said she had noticed how we looked at each other, how I was coming on to her son. Caleb clenched his fists involuntarily. He could picture the scene with painful clarity, his mother, cold and calculating, and Grace, young and vulnerable. She fired me on the spot. Said it was shameful, that I was trying to social climb through you. Grace swallowed hard, the memory clearly still painful. Then she offered me money, a significant amount for someone like me, who had nothing, enough to start over somewhere else, far from Boston, far from you. And you took it, Caleb said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Grace nodded, silent tears beginning to stream down her face. I was alone, Caleb. No family, no real friends, nowhere to go after losing my job and lodging at the mansion. I took it. Her voice broke. And then, a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Caleb felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The revelation wasn't unexpected. He had already deduced much of the story, but hearing the confirmation, the raw truth of his mother interfering in his life in such a way, was devastating. Why didn't you look for me then? He asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. When you found out about Ellie, Grace wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I tried once. I went to your family's company. 3 months after I left, I was determined to tell you about the baby. She smiled sadly. The receptionist called Eleanor's office. Minutes later, the head of security escorted me out of the building, saying there were express orders not to allow me contact with any member of the Whitmore family. My God, Caleb murmured, the revelation hitting him like a punch. I never knew. After that, I gave up. Grace looked directly at him. I convinced myself it was for the best, that you had probably moved on, that maybe you wouldn't even want to know about a child with me. And then Ellie was born, and survival became my only priority. The silence that followed was heavy with 6 years of unlived history, of lost moments, of a future that had been stolen from them by pride, prejudices, and manipulation. Caleb absorbed every word, every revelation. He felt a cold anger toward his mother, but also a growing guilt for his own passivity. He could have searched for Grace more intensely. He could have questioned his mother. He could have done so many things differently. "I'm so sorry," he said finally, the words seeming inadequate in the face of the magnitude of what they had lost. "If I had known—" "We can't change the past, Caleb," Grace interrupted gently. "We did what we could with what we had at that moment." He nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. After a moment, he asked, "Why did you send your resume to my company? After all that, why risk it?" A small smile touched Grace's lips. "I didn't, at least not consciously." Seeing the confusion on his face, she explained, "I was applying for dozens of jobs that week. At some point, Whitmore Solutions appeared in the listings. I saw the company name, but I didn't make the connection to you. I thought it was just a coincidence of last names. And the salary offered was almost double what I was earning cleaning offices. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor," Caleb commented, finding a strange relief in this revelation. It hadn't been a calculated attempt at rapprochement, just a coincidence, or perhaps something more. "When Ellie decided to go in my place," Grace shook her head, half amused, half in disbelief. "That girl has always been too determined for her own good." "Determined like her mother," Caleb observed, a genuine smile forming on his face. The tense moment had passed, replaced by something lighter, more hopeful. The truth was out now. Painful, yes, but also liberating. There were no more secrets between them, only the reality of the present and the possibilities of the future. "Caleb," Grace said after a moment, her voice firmer, "what happened was terrible, but I don't want you to feel sorry for me or Ellie. I don't want your guilt or your remorse. If we're going to try to build some kind of relationship, it needs to be based on something more solid than that." He looked at her with renewed admiration. Even after all she had been through, after years of solitary struggle, Grace still maintained her dignity, her inner strength. "It's not pity," he replied with conviction. "It's respect, admiration, and maybe, with time, something more." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't know exactly what our future will be, Grace, but I know I want to be in Ellie's life. And if you'll let me, in yours too." Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she extended her hand across the space that separated them. Caleb took it in his, feeling the delicacy of her fingers which, despite the calluses of hard work, still held the same softness he remembered. It was a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. A first step toward rebuilding trust. A silent acknowledgement that, despite everything they had lost, there might still be something worth saving. "One day at a time," Grace murmured, lightly squeezing his hand. "One day at a time," Caleb agreed. Through the hospital window, the sun began to set, casting a golden-red glow over the city. A day was ending, and with it, perhaps, the long winter that had settled between them 6 years ago was finally beginning to give way to a promise of spring. The Whitmore mansion stood imposing in the exclusive neighborhood of Beacon Hill, exactly as Caleb remembered. The meticulously cared-for garden, the classic columns, the high windows, everything exuded power and tradition. As he climbed the front steps, he felt the familiar weight of the place's grandeur, something he had left behind when he decided to follow his own path. It had been almost 3 years since his last visit. 3 years of progressive estrangement from Eleanor Whitmore, the family matriarch whose control over her son's life had diminished in proportion to his growing financial independence. The butler who answered the door seemed genuinely surprised to see him. "Mr. Caleb, what an unexpected pleasure." "Hello, Harrison. Is my mother home?" "Yes, sir, in the living room. Shall I announce you?" "That won't be necessary, thank you." Caleb crossed the entrance hall, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Every corner of that house held memories, some good, many suffocating. And now, After Grace's revelation, the entire place seemed contaminated by manipulation and control. He found Eleanor exactly where Harrison had said, sitting in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, impeccably dressed even at home, flipping through an art magazine. At 65, she maintained the elegance and posture that had made her a respected and feared figure in Boston's business and social circles. "Caleb," she said, without looking up from the magazine. "What a surprise. I thought you were too busy with your recent charity work for family visits." He wasn't surprised that she was already informed about Grace and Ellie. Eleanor had always kept her eyes and ears strategically positioned throughout the city. "Hello, Mother." Caleb remained standing, refusing the silent invitation to sit. "We need to talk." Something in his tone finally made Eleanor look up. She studied him for a moment, then closed the magazine and placed it carefully on the side table. "About the maid and her daughter, I presume." The calculated coldness with which she referred to Grace and Ellie made Caleb's blood boil, but he maintained his composure. He wasn't there for an emotional outburst, but for a long-overdue settling of accounts. "Their names are Grace and Ellie," he corrected, his voice controlled, "and yes, it's about them I've come to speak." Eleanor sighed theatrically. "Caleb, darling, I had hoped you would have outgrown this teenage fixation." She was a maid. "That girl with no formal education, no respectable family, no—" "You knew I loved her," Caleb interrupted, the words coming out more intensely than he intended. "You separated us." It wasn't a question, but a direct accusation. Eleanor showed no surprise, nor did she deny it. On the contrary, her face took on an expression of unwavering certainty. "I did what was necessary," she replied calmly. "You were 26, just out of college, with a brilliant future ahead of you. You were going to take your position at the company, make a suitable marriage, continue the family legacy." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I couldn't allow you to throw it all away for an infatuation with a housemaid." Caleb absorbed every word, every cold and calculated justification. There was no regret in Eleanor's voice, only the absolute conviction that she had acted correctly. "You paid her to leave," he continued. "Then you prevented her from contacting me when you found out she was pregnant." A flash of surprise crossed Eleanor's face, not at the accusation itself, but at Caleb's discovery. "She told you then," she commented, quickly composing herself. "Yes, I took the necessary measures. I offered her a chance to start over with sufficient resources. As for the pregnancy," she made a dismissive gesture. "When she showed up at the company months later, it was obvious what she intended. I couldn't allow that kind of trap." "Trap?" Caleb repeated, incredulous. "My daughter is not a trap, Mother. She is an incredible, brilliant child who spent the first 5 years of her life without a father, because you decided you knew what was best for everyone." Eleanor rose, maintaining the dignity that had always characterized her. "I did what any mother would do to protect her son. I have no regrets, Caleb. And if you came here expecting an apology, I'm afraid you will leave disappointed." Caleb looked at the woman before him, powerful, controlling, unable to recognize the damage she had caused. A strange calm washed over him. There was no anger, no longer the desire for confrontation that had brought him here, just a crystal clarity about what needed to be said. "I didn't come for your regret or forgiveness, Mother," he said, his voice firm. "I came only to inform you that I know what you did, and that, despite everything, something beautiful has come from this situation." He walked to the window, looking out at the garden where he had played as a child. So many rules, so many expectations, so little freedom. "I have a daughter," he continued, turning to face Eleanor. "And now I have a mission, to be the father she never had." Something indefinable crossed the matriarch's face, perhaps the realization that, this time, she had irreversibly lost control. "And what about the mother?" she asked, her voice slightly less confident. "Had you also planned to rescue on your old flame?" "What happens between Grace and me is our own business," Caleb replied. "What I know for sure is that they are both now part of my life, permanently." Eleanor did not answer. Her silence said more than any words. Caleb walked to the door but stopped before leaving. "I hope one day you'll want to meet your granddaughter," he said without looking back. She deserves a grandmother more than you deserve to know her. But the door will be open, should you decide that family is more important than appearances. He left the room and the mansion without waiting for a response. The cool autumn air greeted him like a blessing. As he walked down the steps toward the street, he felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't about revenge or resentment. It was about closure. About closing a door on the past, on the manipulations, on the suffocating expectations, to open a new one with the present. A present where Ellie smiled when she saw him, where Grace was slowly learning to trust again, where the possibility of a real family, based on love and respect, finally seemed within reach. He got into his car and drove toward the hospital. Today was the day of Grace's discharge, a new beginning for all of them. Caleb's apartment had been transformed in recent weeks. Colorful drawings decorated the refrigerator, children's books occupied the living room shelves, and one wall displayed a mural of recent photos. Ellie in the park, Grace smiling during a picnic, the three of them together on a carousel. After her hospital discharge, Grace had accepted Caleb's suggestion for her and Ellie to stay in the guest room until her full recovery. The temporary arrangement had already lasted 3 weeks, and no one seemed in a hurry to change it. Grace's recovery progressed steadily, but slowly. The color was returning to her cheeks, and the doctors were pleased with the progress of her tests. Still, the fatigue persisted, a result of years of neglecting her own health. That Sunday afternoon, the three had had lunch together. The meal had taken place in a light atmosphere, with Ellie dominating the conversation, talking about the planets she had learned about in one of the new books. Now, the girl was drawing at the coffee table, while Grace and Caleb exchanged meaningful glances. They had talked the night before, after Ellie fell asleep. It was time to tell the truth. "Ellie," Grace called softly, "can we talk with you for a little bit?" The girl looked up from her drawing, a colorful representation of the solar system. "I finished Jupiter. Look how many spots it has." "It's beautiful," Caleb praised, sitting on the sofa next to Grace. "But your mother wants to talk to you about something important." Ellie put down her colored pencils and came over, climbing onto the sofa between the two adults. She looked from one to the other with her big green eyes, attentive and intelligent. "Is it serious?" she asked, sensing the different atmosphere. Grace took a deep breath and took her daughter's hand in hers. "Remember when you used to ask me about your dad, and I said one day you would meet him?" Ellie nodded, suddenly serious. "And remember I told you that your dad was someone special, but that he couldn't be with us?" Again, the girl nodded. Her eyes briefly moved to Caleb, then back to her mother. "Ellie." Grace paused, searching for the right words. "That Caleb is your dad?" For a moment, there was only silence. Ellie looked at Grace, then at Caleb, her wide eyes processing the information. Then a broad smile lit up her face. "Good thing I went to that interview. Otherwise, I would have never found you." The simplicity of the answer, the pure and unreserved acceptance, hit Caleb like a wave of emotion. He felt his eyes well up, and when he looked at Grace, he saw she was also fighting back tears. "You're not surprised?" Grace asked, stroking her daughter's hair. Ellie shrugged, with that disconcerting wisdom that sometimes emerged. "A little. But I kind of thought you might be. We have the same smile." Caleb laughed softly, marveling at the girl's perception. "And are you happy about it?" he asked hesitantly. In response, Ellie threw herself into his arms, hugging him with all the strength her little arms could muster. "Very happy. Now I have a real dad." Caleb hugged her back, a deep emotion running through his chest. Over the girl's head, his eyes met Grace's, who was smiling through her tears. The moment was magical, almost unreal, as if an invisible circle was finally closing. "Does this mean we're going to live together forever?" Ellie asked, still hugging Caleb. The innocent question carried implications the adults had not yet fully resolved. Caleb and Grace exchanged a look. There were feelings rekindling between them, no doubt, but also caution. "For now," Grace answered carefully, "we'll stay here while I finish recovering, then we'll see what's best for all of us." "But regardless of where we live," Caleb added, "we will always be a family. That will never change." This answer seemed to satisfy Ellie, who finally let go of Caleb and looked at them both with a curious expression. "Can I call you Dad now?" she asked Caleb. He felt a lump in his throat. I would love that." "Dad," she tried, as if testing how the word sounded. Then she smiled, satisfied. "I like how it sounds." The following weeks brought significant changes. Caleb began the legal process to officially recognize his paternity of Ellie. The DNA test was a formality. No one had any doubts, but it was necessary for the process. At the same time, he began looking for a more suitable house for the three of them. The apartment, though spacious, had no yard, nor enough space for an active child. He found a charming property in the suburbs, a brick house with a large garden, trees to climb, and the best elementary school in the region just a few blocks away. When he showed the house to Grace and Ellie, the girls' reaction was pure joy. She ran from room to room, imagining where her books, her toys, and her future telescope that Caleb had promised would go. Grace, on the other hand, was more reserved. "It's very generous, Caleb, but..." "But what?" he asked when they were alone in the spacious kitchen. "I don't want you to feel obligated to do all this. The house is beautiful, but it's a huge commitment." Caleb moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Grace, none of this is an obligation. It's what I want to do. What I should have done years ago if I'd had the chance." He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm not just buying a house for Ellie. I'm creating a home for the three of us." The three of us hung in the air, loaded with meaning. In recent months, the relationship between them had evolved slowly, carefully. Small touches, late-night talks after Ellie fell asleep, a hesitant kiss the week before. "One step at a time," Grace replied, but her smile suggested that the path they were on was the right one. 3 months after the revelation, on a sunny spring morning, Ellie stood at the entrance of the new house, proudly wearing her school uniform, a blue plaid skirt, white shirt, and a blazer with the Oakwood Elementary School emblem. Her new backpack was filled with notebooks, colored pencils, and a small pencil case that Grace had embroidered with her name. "I'm nervous," she confessed, adjusting the uniform's bow tie. "It's normal," Grace assured her, bending down to fix a stray strand of hair from her braid. "But you're going to do great. You're the smartest girl I know." "And the bravest," Caleb added, holding a camera to record the moment. "So after all, who else would walk into an interview room at 5 years old?" Ellie laughed, the comment easing some of her tension. Caleb took a few photos, capturing the mixed expression of nervousness and excitement on his daughter's face. Together, they walked the 4 blocks to the school. It was a beautiful institution, with a wooded campus and modern facilities. Caleb had made sure it offered everything Ellie might need: small classes, music, science, and art programs, and individualized support to help her adapt. As they reached the main gate, they saw other families saying goodbye, children running to find friends. A young, smiling teacher approached them. "You must be Ellie Holloway Whitmore," she said warmly. "I'm Miss Bennett, your teacher." Ellie shook the teacher's hand with surprising formality. "A pleasure to meet you. I'm excited to learn about volcanoes. I read that you have a science club." Miss Bennett seemed impressed. "We do, and we would love to have you in the club. But first, how about we meet your classroom and your new classmates?" Ellie nodded, then turned to her parents. She hugged Grace first, then Caleb, holding on to him a little longer. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "We'll be here at pickup," he promised. "And you'll have so many things to tell us." Ellie smiled, adjusted the backpack on her shoulders, and took a few steps away. Then she turned one last time and waved, "Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad." Grace and Caleb watched as she followed the teacher, head held high, ready for her new adventure. When she disappeared inside the building, Grace rested her head on Caleb's shoulder. "She's going to be okay," he said, though the statement sounded more like a question. "She will," Grace confirmed. "She's always been strong." They walked back home, hand in hand, in a comfortable silence. Grace was now almost completely recovered. The pneumonia had been treated, the anemia controlled. She strictly followed the diet prescribed by the doctors, took light walks every morning, and had recently started working part-time coordinating a social project at the foundation linked to Caleb's company, a program that offered scholarships to low-income youth. For the first time in many years, Grace was living, not just surviving, and the change was visible in her brighter eyes, her easier smile, her renewed confidence. When they got home, Caleb gently pulled her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her distant gaze. "About how life comes full circle," she replied. "6 years ago, when I found out I was pregnant and alone, I never imagined we would be here one day." Caleb nodded, understanding the feeling perfectly. "The past separated us," he said softly. "But a 5-year-old girl, with a resume in her hand, brought us back together." Grace smiled, rising up to kiss him gently. "And now, we're a family. A family. Not perfect, not conventional, built through pain and loss, but also through courage, forgiveness, and love. A family that had found its way back to each other, thanks to the determination of a little girl who refused to give up on the dream of a better future." Outside, spring painted the world with its vibrant colors, promising new beginnings. And inside that house, 3 hearts beat to the same rhythm, finally in the place where they were meant to be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.